Welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you decided to join us today because we are looking at a life that is almost too wild to believe.
Oh, it really is.
Today, we're exploring the incredible life, the enduring legacy, and just the truly multifaceted career of Roderick George Toombs. But, you probably know him by the name he made famous across the globe.
Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Exactly. Rowdy Roddy Piper.
And to really understand this cultural phenomenon, our source material today is a comprehensive biographical dossier. It details everything from his incredibly difficult journey as a runaway teenager to his eventual status as a global pop culture icon.
Yeah, we're going to look closely at the forces that shaped him, both inside and outside the ring. Our mission today is to unpack exactly how a kid from Canada came to be considered by many as the greatest heel, the greatest villain in professional wrestling history.
Right, and we're going to look at how he completely revolutionized the art of the interview and how he left this permanent, unmistakable footprint on Hollywood and pop culture.
It's a story packed with sheer entertainment value, but also real grit and a lot of sacrifice.
It is. And beyond just the entertaining anecdotes, I really want to explore why his specific brand of villainy and his unique charisma resonated so deeply with audiences for decades. Because there is a psychology to what he did, a way he understood crowd dynamics that was, well, it was genuinely masterful.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Starting from the very beginning, because I was looking at the dossier and right off the bat, I was completely thrown.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're going to say.
The guy whose whole identity is bagpipes and kilts, who was famously billed from Glasgow, Scotland.
He isn't actually from Scotland?
Not even a little bit.
Not even close. He was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada.
Wow.
Yeah, he was the son of a Scottish-Canadian mother and an Anglo-Canadian father, and his father was an officer in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP.
So a strict law enforcement household.
Extremely strict. And Toombs was naturally rebellious, so the friction there was inevitable. His upbringing was far from easy, and the rebellion started early.
He's a tough kid.
He was. He was actually expelled from junior high school for carrying a switchblade.
Jeez.
Yeah. That event, along with the overall tension in the house, led to a severe falling out with his father. He ended up leaving home at a very young age.
And Saskatchewan is not a forgiving place to be homeless as a teenager. I mean,
Yeah.
the winters there are brutal.
Oh, freezing.
So bouncing between youth hostels, he had to build this incredible toughness just to survive.
Absolutely. Survival became his primary education. He started doing odd jobs at local gyms just to scrape by. Running errands for professional wrestlers who would come through the territory.
Just trying to make a buck?
Right. But he wasn't just watching them. He was actively training his own body. He became an amateur boxer. He even competed in the Golden Gloves.
Which is one of the most prestigious amateur boxing tournaments you can enter.
It really is.
So he was a legitimate tough guy before he ever even put on a pair of wrestling boots. The dossier mentions he was even awarded a black belt in judo from Gene LaBelle.
Gene LaBelle is an absolute icon in the martial arts world. He's widely considered one of the toughest men who ever lived. So earning a black belt from him is no small feat.
That's real credibility.
It proves that behind all the theatricality and the eventual showmanship of his career, Toombs had legitimate, real-world combat skills. When he finally started wrestling under promoter Al Tomko, he was ready.
He definitely was.
In fact, his very first match was up in Churchill, Manitoba, wrestling in front of a notoriously rough audience of lumberjacks.
That sounds like a scene straight out of a movie.
Yeah.
But how do we get from a tough Canadian kid fighting lumberjacks to Roddy Piper? Because the story of how he got that name is completely accidental, isn't it?
It really is. It happened when he was working for the American Wrestling Association, the AWA, around 1969 or maybe the early 70s.
Yeah.
He was getting ready for a match against Larry Hennig, and he had some friends from a local pipe band who offered to play the bagpipes for his entrance.
As you do.
Right. So he's walking to the ring to the sound of bagpipes, and for some inexplicable reason, he is handing out dandelions to the crowd.
Handing out dandelions.
Yeah.
Just such a bizarre, surreal image for a tough guy fighter.
Completely strained.
And the ring announcer's just standing there utterly confused.
Exactly. The ring announcer had absolutely no idea what this kid's last name was. All he knew was his first name was Roddy. So, seeing the pipe band, the announcer just improvises on the spot and says over the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, here comes Roddy the Piper."
And just like that, history is made. A throwaway line from an announcer completely rewrites his life.
What's fascinating here is how organic and accidental wrestling personas used to be. Today, characters are heavily workshopped, focus grouped, and copyrighted by massive corporate creative teams.
Oh, very corporate now.
But back in the territory days, a mistake by an announcer could define your entire career. And what's incredible is how Toombs fully embraced it. He took this random, accidental Scottish identity, complete with the kilt and the bagpipes, and he committed to it with everything he had.
He leaned into it so hard. By the late 70s, he had moved to the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, working the California territories. And this is where the dossier shows him really mastering the art of generating absolute nuclear heat.
The bad guy heat.
Right. He didn't just want the standard boos that a bad guy gets. He wanted pure, visceral anger from the crowd.
He was a master agitator,
Yeah.
and he understood cultural trigger points perfectly. When he was working in the Los Angeles area, he built up intense animosity by continuously insulting the local Mexican community.
Just brutal stuff on the microphone.
Yes, he wound the audience up tighter and tighter over weeks of television. Then he set up this masterful piece of theater. He promised the crowd that he was going to make up for all his past insults by formally playing the Mexican national anthem on his bagpipes in the middle of the ring.
You can imagine the tension in the arena. I mean, the crowd gives him a moment of silence. He raises the bagpipe.
And he plays La Cucaracha.
Wow.
It caused a literal riot in the arena.
A real riot.
Fans tried to storm the ring. That is the level of emotional manipulation he was capable of. He wasn't just breaking the rules of a wrestling match. He was poking at cultural pride and social nerves. He was making it deeply personal for the people in the seats. It was dangerous work.
And playing the villain at that level comes with a massive physical toll. People genuinely wanted to see him get beaten to a pulp, and the matches reflected that brutality.
They definitely did.
I was reading about the 1983 Starrcade event, the dog collar match against Greg Valentine. What exactly does a dog collar match entail?
It is exactly as barbaric as it sounds. The two wrestlers are literally chained together at the neck by heavy leather dog collars and a thick steel chain.
So there's no running away.
There's no escaping your opponent. It's designed to be a bloody, grueling brawl. During this specific match, Valentine struck Piper in the side of the head with the chain so hard that it ruptured Piper's left eardrum.
And that wasn't just a temporary injury for the sake of the storyline?
No, the damage was permanent. He lost 50 to 75% of his hearing in that ear for the rest of his life. He actually referred to that period of his career as the year of the ear.
I want you to think about that for a second. The sheer commitment it takes to sacrifice your own physical well-being, your own hearing, just to entertain a crowd, just to push a story forward.
It speaks to the blurring of the lines between the performance and the performer. The pain was real, the hearing loss was real, even if the narrative was predetermined. And it was that level of raw, undeniable authenticity that made him so compelling to watch. You couldn't look away because you felt the real danger he was putting himself in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because in 1984, he makes the jump to the World Wrestling Federation under Vince McMahon.
The big stage.
The biggest. He brings all of that heat, all of that mic skill to a massive national platform. He didn't just wrestle. He completely revolutionized wrestling television with a segment called Piper's Pit.
To appreciate the impact of Piper's Pit, you have to understand what wrestling television looked like before it. The standard format was essentially a wrestler standing in front of a blue screen or a generic locker room door with a broadcaster holding a microphone.
Very basic.
Very basic, and typically only the champions got the television time to speak. Piper completely shattered that paradigm.
It demanded his own set, right?
He did. He got his own distinct set, and he made the interview segment itself a main event attraction. But the real genius of Piper's Pit wasn't just the production value, it was the psychology.
How so?
Piper took the safest space in wrestling, the interview podium, and turned it into an unpredictable hostage situation. He was the host and the instigator, and the other wrestlers weren't his guests. They were his victims. He violated the audience's sense of television safety.
And the things that happened on that set were pure shock value.
Yeah.
The most legendary moment, the one that is burned into the brains of anyone who watched television in the 1980s, involved Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Oh, the coconut.
Yeah. Piper was insulting Snuka's Polynesian heritage, bringing out pineapples and coconuts to mock him, and then mid-sentence Piper just grabs a real coconut and completely shatters it over Snuka's head.
It was incredibly violent and completely shocking for television at the time. He was always looking for the absolute edge of what was acceptable and then taking a step past it.
He really pushed the envelope.
He did, and it is important to note objectively that a lot of his 80s heel work heavily utilized racially charged controversy to generate that anger from the crowd.
Yeah, the dossier outlines that pretty clearly.
We see another glaring example of this later at WrestleMania 6, where he pushed the controversial boundaries of the era by wrestling Bad News Brown with half of his face and body painted black. It was all part of the extreme button-pushing lengths he would go to as a villain to generate pure shock. We're reporting this impartially, of course, but it was undeniably a core part of his strategy to be hated.
He wanted to be the most hated man on the planet, and it made him the perfect essential foil for the ultimate good guy of the era, Hulk Hogan. Piper's ability to be so profoundly hated is what allowed the WWF to achieve mainstream crossover success in the 1980s.
Absolutely. The rock and wrestling connection doesn't work without a villain you desperately want to see lose. Piper was the crucial antagonist for the MTV special The War to Settle the Score, and of course he anchored the main event of the very first WrestleMania in 1985.
WrestleMania, I was just a massive pop culture collision. You had Cyndi Lauper, Captain Lou Albano, Hulk Hogan, and Mr. T from the A-Team all mixing it up in a professional wrestling ring.
A spectacle.
Huge. And Piper and Paul Orndorff wrestled Hogan and Mr. T. But the tension between Piper and Mr. T wasn't just part of the show, was it?
No, that animosity was highly legitimate. Piper actively resented Mr. T. Oh, yes. Piper was a seasoned professional who had paid his dues in the territories, sleeping in cars and fighting for his life, and he felt an actor was coming in and disrespecting the business. More than that, Piper was frustrated because he felt he was being forced to cover up Mr. T's complete lack of actual wrestling ability in the ring just to protect the celebrity's image.
And that real-life tension just kept escalating until they finally had a boxing match at WrestleMania 2.
Right. And the boxing match devolved because Piper's real frustration boiled over. He essentially stopped working the match, bodily slammed Mr. T to the mat, and intentionally got himself disqualified. He just refused to play along anymore.
But the irony is that while he was rejecting a Hollywood actor in his ring, Piper himself was about to make a massive leap into the acting world. Let's transition to his prolific Hollywood career, because he wasn't just doing goofy cameos. He landed the lead role in John Carpenter's 1988 sci-fi cult classic, They Live.
It's a brilliant piece of subversive filmmaking. They Live is a sharp critique of 1980s Reagan-era consumerism and yuppie culture. Piper played a character named John Nada, a homeless drifter looking for construction work in Los Angeles, who discovers a pair of special sunglasses.
The sunglasses that reveal the truth.
Exactly. When he puts them on, he sees that the world is secretly controlled by skull-faced aliens who are suppressing humanity with subliminal messages hidden in billboards and money.
It's such a great concept. And Piper was the perfect, rugged, everyman protagonist for it. He brings this exhausted, working-class grit to the role, and he gave us one of the most iconic, quoted lines in cinematic history.
Oh, the bank scene.
Yes. He walks into a bank armed with a shotgun, completely deadpan, and delivers a line he completely improvised on set. I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, but I'm all out of bubblegum.
It is cinematic perfection. But beyond the catchphrase, the film is famous for an incredibly drawn-out, brutal alley fight scene between Piper and Keith David. The entire premise of the fight is just Piper desperately trying to force Keith David to put the sunglasses on so he can see the aliens.
It goes on for almost 6 minutes.
Yes, and that single scene took 3 weeks to rehearse. What makes it a masterpiece is that it isn't slick or heavily choreographed like a martial arts film. It looks like two exhausted, desperate men beating the absolute daylights out of each other in a dirty alleyway.
And that specific fight scene became a massive piece of pop culture all on its own. It has been parodied shot for shot in the animated series South Park and Adventure Time. It was even recreated in the video game Saints Row the Fifth. And the amazing part is that Piper actually voiced himself in that game, recreating his own fight. He had this whole second life in media.
He really did. Decades later, he took on a recurring role as Da Maniac on the hit comedy series It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He played this deranged, washed-up, independent wrestler who lives in his car, hoards chestnuts, and sells questionable essential oils.
It was so funny.
It was a brilliant piece of self-parody that showed off his incredible comedic timing and his willingness to highlight the sometimes tragic absurdities of his own industry. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Piper was a true pioneer.
In what way?
He was one of the very first wrestlers to successfully bridge the gap between the squared circle and mainstream Hollywood credibility. Before Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or John Cena or Dave Bautista were carrying major motion pictures, there was Roddy Piper proving that a professional wrestler could be a captivating, critically appreciated film lead.
He paved the way for everyone who came after him. But the wrestling ring always seemed to call him back. He made several returns to WWE throughout the 90s and 2000s, and there is a story from his late career that just gives you chills. It's about how a fan vote literally saved his life.
It's an unbelievable sequence of events. In 2006, the WWE held a pay-per-view event called Cyber Sunday. The gimmick of the show was that fans could vote online to determine the stipulations of the matches. The fans overwhelmingly voted for a 52-year-old Roddy Piper to team up with Ric Flair to compete for the World Tag Team Championship.
Which they actually won against a much younger team.
They did win the belts. But the championship isn't the most important part of this story. Because Piper was selected by the fans to wrestle on that specific card, he was required to undergo WWE's strict pre-match medical examinations to ensure he was cleared to compete. During those routine exams, doctors discovered an abnormality. It turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow. If he doesn't get voted into that match, he didn't take the physical.
Precisely. Piper later posted a very emotional message to his fans on his website, stating explicitly that if they had not voted for him, he never would have gone to the hospital. The cancer wouldn't have been diagnosed in time for him to undergo the radiation therapy that ultimately saved him. The fans, quite literally, saved his life by wanting to see him perform one more time.
That is just an incredible twist of fate. But Piper was always very aware of his mortality. And unlike a lot of veterans from his era, he wasn't afraid to pull back the curtain and talk about the darker realities of his profession. The dossier highlights a highly controversial interview he did on HBO's Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel in 2003.
That interview caused massive friction with WWE management at the time. Piper spoke incredibly candidly about the dark side of the industry. He discussed the grueling physical pain, the relentless schedule, and his own extensive drug use over the years just to cope and keep performing.
He didn't hold back.
No, he admitted that he actively disliked the person he became when he was deeply entrenched in the wrestling business.
He made a really stark prediction during that interview, too.
He did. He stated plainly that because of his poor health and the immense toll the industry took on his body, he would not make 65.
And tragically, that prediction was accurate. Roderick George Toombs passed away in his sleep on July 31st, 2015, at his home in Los Angeles. He was 61 years old.
Far too young.
The death certificate cited a cardiopulmonary arrest caused by hypertension, with a pulmonary embolism as a contributing factor. It was a massive sudden loss for the entertainment world.
But the evidence of his legacy was immediately visible across the combat sports landscape. Look at Ronda Rousey, one of the most famous and dominant mixed martial artists in the history of the sport. Before she ever transitioned to professional wrestling, her friends in the MMA world called her Rowdy. But she initially refused to use the nickname professionally in the UFC because she felt it would be disrespectful to Piper's legacy.
Right, because in the minds of the fans, there is only one Rowdy.
Exactly. But she was eventually introduced to Piper through Gene LeBell, the very same martial arts legend who had given Piper his judo black belt decades earlier.
Full circle.
They met, and Piper personally gave Rousey his blessing to carry on the Rowdy nickname into the octagon. The day after Piper died, Rousey had a major title defense at UFC 190. She dedicated the real fight to him, won it in dominant fashion, and made sure to honor his memory first thing in her post-fight interview.
That's amazing.
It shows the cross-generational, cross-disciplinary respect he commanded. From fake fighting to real combat sports, his influence was undeniable.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the runaway kid from Saskatchewan, the riots in Los Angeles, the broken ear, the pop culture impact of They Live, the medical miracles, and the tragedy, how do we summarize a life like this?
I think it comes down to a man whose absolute, unflinching dedication to his craft permanently blurred the lines between performance and reality. He didn't just play a character on television. He inhabited it so fully and with such physical and emotional sacrifice that Rowdy Roddy Piper became as real as Roderick Toombs. He showed that a villain could be the most captivating, essential person in the room, and in doing so, he changed the grammar of sports entertainment forever.
Well said.
And this raises an important question for you to ponder. There's one final detail in our source material that we haven't touched on yet, and it comes from another wrestling legend, Bret Hart. Sometime after Piper had passed, Bret Hart suffered a severe stroke. It was a very dark, incredibly difficult time for him, filled with uncertainty. Hart noted that of all the people he worked with over the decades, all the people in the massive, interconnected wrestling business,
Yep.
Roddy Piper was the only wrestler who took the time to come visit him in the hospital.
The only one.
I want you to leave with that thought today. Consider the profound irony of the man dubbed the greatest villain in wrestling history. How does a man who spent his entire life mastering the art of generating absolute visceral heat, a man whose job was to be hated by millions of people every single night, end up being the only one with the deep, quiet compassion to show up for a friend in their darkest hour?
That is a powerful dichotomy to mull over. It really makes you realize how deeply complex the people behind these massive pop culture icons truly are. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring the fascinating, contradictory lives behind the figures you think you know. We will see you next time.